The human prisoner refused to kneel. Now the alien guards stand at attention. The interrogation deck of the Kaytheran warship, the Vindicator, was a study in imposing, functional oppression. Gleaming chrome steel plates met at precise angles, the only ambient sound the low, rhythmic thrum of the engine cores vibrating through the soles of Garett's boots. The space smelled of ionized air, not the fresh, post-storm kind, but the metallic, sterile tang of high-efficiency alien filtration systems. He stood in the center of the vast, circular chamber, bathed in a conical beam of intense white light that felt more like a physical weight than illumination. He wore only a sleeveless gray tank top and dark pants, emphasizing the wide, dense breadth of his shoulders and the thick lines of muscle in his arms, which were currently crossed over his chest. This posture was his first act of defiance, casual, compact, and utterly unyielding. Before him, positioned on a raised platform flanked by 6 identically armored guards, stood Commander Erlynae. She was undeniably striking, embodying the Kaytheran synthesis of grace and lethal intent. Her sleek armor, a contrast of metallic pink and silver, was designed to emphasize rather than conceal her lean, powerful physique. The material molded around her curves, leaving smooth swathes of pink skin visible on her limbs. Her long black hair cascaded over the plates of her shoulders, and her thick pink-tipped tail flicked once sharply behind her. Her large, amber eyes, set in a face of sharp, feline elegance, bore into Garett. The guard immediately to her right, Car, unnamed character, a rigid soldier with a low, digitized voice, issued the command. By the authority of the Hierarch Viz-ka, you stand before Commander Erlynae of the Venithian fleet, Car stated, the words resonating with synthetic crispness. Show respect, kneel. The command hung in the sterilized air. Garett didn't flinch, he didn't blink. He simply shifted his weight slightly, distributing it evenly across both feet, making himself feel heavier, more immovable. He raised his chin, his intense brown gaze meeting Erlynae's directly. Erlynae's expression was initially one of bored expectation. She had overseen hundreds of these compliance rituals across dozens of species. They all broke, they all knelt. It was simple, cultural programming. But as the silence stretched, a frown of confusion, then irritation, creased the smooth skin between her eyes. The command was issued, human, Erlynae said, her voice a low, compelling contralto with a subtle, unnerving purr beneath the tone. She didn't shout, her command was enforced by status, not volume. Garett didn't move his arms, but his jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. The muscles in his forearms tightened. I heard it, he replied, his voice rough and low, carrying a simple, flat resonance that belonged to a man who had faced worse than alien judgment. Erlynae's tail, which had been gently swaying, snapped straight and rigid. The 6 guards flanking her shifted their weight simultaneously, a minor metallic sound that nonetheless echoed loudly. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. The failure to comply is not an option, Erlynae informed him, her amber eyes narrowing as she stepped down from the platform. Her armored boots made only the faintest click on the metal floor, an unnerving sound of controlled approach. She stopped inches from him, forced to look slightly up at his height. Garett refused to back away, refusing to concede even a breath of space. He could feel the artificial chill radiating off her armor and caught the faint, musky true scent of her species, a sharp, almost metallic aroma that spoke of pure, unadulterated predator. Kneeling is the natural position of submission to a superior intellect and a dominant physical presence, Erlynae continued, her lips curving into a predatory semblance of a smile. We are both, therefore you will kneel. Garett let out a quiet exhale that lifted his chest. I am a prisoner, Commander, he observed, his voice completely level. My status is already established. You want a performance, a ritual that proves something to your soldiers or maybe to yourself. I refuse to give you either. This wasn't merely defiance, it was psychological warfare. He had identified the why of the ritual and rejected its value entirely. The surrounding guards went absolutely motionless. This was not the expected panicked negotiation or breakdown. This was utter, rational rejection of their foundational hierarchy. Erlynae felt a strange spike of adrenaline, not the dull heat of anger, but the cold thrill of encountering the truly unknown. The hierarch had warned her the humans were illogical, but she hadn't anticipated this degree of quiet, immovable fortitude. She raised a hand, her slender, pink fingers tipped with metallic claws, and pressed one cold fingertip against the hard, unyielding muscle of Garett's shoulder. You believe your will is stronger than the consequences, human, she questioned, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper, trying to trigger a base fear response. Garett looked down at her hand, then back into her eyes. "My will is stronger than your command," he corrected, the subtle implication that her authority was the only weak link in the chain. Erlynae pulled her hand back, the movement sharp and deliberate. Her predatory gaze swept over his body, his heavy legs, his immovable stance, the coiled strength held in his crossed arms. She recognized something in his posture, a species that evolved to stand and fight, not to surrender and hide. "Carr, abandon the psychological breakdown protocol," Erlynae commanded, turning her back to Garett, her mind already racing. "The human mind does not register compliance in the way we anticipated. Shift to physical compliance testing, Protocol Lambda 7, prep the Annex training deck. I want to see how strong that will is when his knees are forced into the deck." She didn't wait for a response, moving toward the exit ramp. But just before she left, she glanced over her shoulder, her eyes catching the reflection of the intense white light. "I will break you, Garett," she murmured, using his name for the first time, giving the threat a disturbingly personal edge. "And when you finally do kneel, it will be because I permitted it." Garett simply watched her go, his eyes completely steady. He maintained his stance until the heavy blast door sealed shut, leaving him only with the silent, rigid guards. He knew then that the fight wasn't about escape, it was about proving his fundamental superiority in a language they had forgotten, raw, unyielding physical contest. He uncrossed his arms, flexing his fingers slightly, readying the only weapon he had, his body. The Annex training deck was not the gleaming chrome steel of the interrogation center, it was a rougher, utilitarian space designed to absorb abuse. The walls were lined with heavy, impact-dampening composites, and the floor was a rubberized mat that gave slightly beneath his weight. The air was thick and dry, and the space felt less like a prison and more like a cage designed for a much larger, more violent animal. Garett was positioned in the center, the bright overhead lights highlighting the damp sweat already forming on his arms. Commander Erlynae stood elevated on a viewing gallery, separated by a thick energy screen that hummed quietly. She was flanked by the same 6 guards, who were now watching him with focused, professional curiosity. "The test is simple, human," Erlynae's voice projected through the chamber, stripped of its previous purr, now pure command authority. "You have been issued no weapon. You will face 2 of my guards, Joss and Vic's unnamed characters. They possess standard sonic riot sticks set to sublethal output. You will not be released until you submit to the ground." She paused, and Garett could feel the weight of her predatory gaze, assessing his muscular tension. "Submission means collapsing or kneeling, we do not care which." The 2 designated guards, Joss and Vix, detached from the group and entered the arena. They were textbook examples of K-Theran discipline, fully armored, methodical, their movements precise and economical. They moved into a classic flanking position, their riot sticks humming with contained kinetic energy, ready to deliver jarring, painful blows. Garett watched them, his chest rising and falling slowly. He immediately recognized their weakness, precision-bred predictability. They moved in perfect synchronization, following the dictates of an external combat program. Human combat, especially the kind he specialized in, survival and close-quarters brutality, was about asymmetry. Joss struck first, aiming for a debilitating blow to Garett's left knee joint. The guard moved quickly, but the angle was classic, expected. Garett didn't dodge, he took the opportunity, shifting his weight just enough that the impact landed on his heavily muscled thigh, sending a painful, vibrating shockwave up his leg, but leaving the joint intact. The moment the guard's stick contacted him, Garett reacted with explosive speed. He didn't pull back, instead he drove into the blow, collapsing the distance between them. The guard, trained to maintain a specific perimeter and deliver precise force, was caught completely off guard by the human's willingness to absorb punishment and close the gap. Garett's right hand shot out, not in a punch, but in a brutal, open-palm strike to the guard's helmet visor. It wasn't designed to injure the alien, but to disorient the internal targeting systems and obscure its view. Vix immediately moved to intercept, bringing its stick in a heavy arc toward Garett's temple. This was the moment Garett had manufactured. He spun on the impacted leg, relying on the shock and disorientation of Joss, and grabbed the first guard's armored arm, pulling Joss directly into the path of Vix's strike. The sonic stick hit Joss with a loud, sickening thwack, sending the armored guard reeling and the stick clattering to the floor. The speed of the reversal stunned the K-Theran guards on the platform. They were trained to fight against creatures that followed logic, that preserved their own safety, or that utilized superior technology. They were not trained to fight an opponent who turned the environment and even them into weapons. Jaw stumbled, trying to regain the precise fighting stance. Garett didn't give him the chance. He scooped up the fallen sonic stick, a simple, heavy baton, and brought the butt of it down onto Joss's shoulder joint. It was a crude, brutal move designed not to incapacitate, but to shock the highly disciplined nervous system. Joss buckled, letting out a synthetic grunt of pain. Vix reacted with professional fury, drawing a secondary, smaller impact tool, but this time Garett was ready. He threw the heavy sonic stick he held straight at Vix's chest plate. It was a distraction, an unorthodox projectile. As Vix instinctively raised an arm to block the impact, Garett launched himself forward in a low, sprinting tackle. He hit Vix at the knees with a jarring, bone-jarring impact, bringing the guard crashing down onto the rubberized deck with a tremendous thud. The noise died away. 2 guards were down, one holding its shoulder, the other prone and stunned. Garett stood over the prone Vix, breathing heavily, the sweat now plastering his tank top to his powerfully defined chest. Silence. Erlynae watched the playback on the wall monitor, her face a mask of complex, conflicting emotions. Her perfect posture had slumped slightly, her tail was curled tight, and her breath was held high in her chest. "He used the environment," she murmured, her voice barely audible even in the viewing gallery. "He used them against each other. There was no finesse, no discipline, only pure brutal efficiency. What kind of combat is this?" The remaining 4 guards exchanged glances. They were observing a form of warfare completely outside their extensive training parameters. Erlynae descended from the platform, her steps quick and agitated, stopping at the energy screen separating her from Garett. "You are reckless, human," she accused, her voice holding a dangerous edge. "You absorbed a strike that should have ruptured your knee structure." Garett turned to face her, wiping a streak of sweat from his temple. He didn't look triumphant, just weary and utterly resolved. "I protected the joint, Commander," he explained, his breathing still ragged. "The K-Theron designed for compliance focuses on breaking the body. Human survival focuses on keeping the foundation intact, no matter the cost to the surrounding flesh." He paused, a faint, almost predatory smile touching his lips. "I am still standing, Commander," he concluded, emphasizing the standing, "and they are not." Erlynae's amber eyes flared with a sudden, unnerving intensity. This was not the broken creature she expected. This was a challenging animal displaying a terrifying, self-sacrificing adaptation. She didn't feel anger anymore. She felt the cold, thrilling recognition of a dominant force. The arousal was a quiet, deep pulse that shamed her. "Clear the deck," she commanded, the words strained. "Bring the prisoner to the medical bay for rapid repair, then return him to a holding cell adjacent to my quarters. I need to study this failure in compliance." The medical bay was swift and brutally efficient. High-frequency sonic pulses addressed the muscle bruising on Garett's thigh, and a dermal sealant smoothed the superficial scrapes. The pain subsided quickly, leaving behind only a dull, tired ache in his core. Later confined to a small, utilitarian cell designated Auxiliary Holding 4, Garett sat on a bench, the metallic aroma of the K-Theron ship more pronounced here. The cell was sparse, with thick, clear vitrium walls and a single reinforced bench. Crucially, it was silent. A chime sounded at the cell door and it shimmered open. Erlynae entered, alone. She wore a simple, unarmored service uniform, a sleek, dark gray bodysuit that clung to her figure, allowing the full sight of her mesmerizing pink skin and the fluid movement of her tail. The suit only highlighted the lethal athleticism hidden beneath her combat plating. Her amber eyes held a dark, analytical sheen. She did not sit, choosing instead to lean against the wall opposite him, crossing her arms over her chest in a mirrored echo of his own earlier posture, a subtle, non-verbal acknowledgement of the stalemate. "My analysis of the combat footage is complete, Garett," she stated, bypassing pleasantries. "Your strategy was illogical. You sacrificed structural integrity to maintain mobility. You endured pain that would render most Class 3 species unconscious. Why?" Garett shrugged, the movement causing the powerful muscles of his upper back to shift beneath the thin gray fabric. "Because pain is temporary, loss of mobility is permanent," he answered simply. "You value the avoidance of injury, we value the maintenance of capability. They are not the same thing." Erlynae tilted her head, her pointed ear twitching slightly, a subtle indicator of mental processing. "Your heart rate barely fluctuated during the most intense impacts. Your adrenaline response was high but controlled. You displayed a profound tolerance for the environment rather than fear of it. She took 2 slow steps toward him, closing the distance to just a few feet. Her eyes scanned his face, searching for a flicker of deceit or bravado. The Hierarch Viz-ka believes this is proof of human biological deficiency, that your species evolved to feel less, she stated, her voice dropping to that dangerous, low purr. Garett met her gaze, his expression quiet, intense. The Hierarch is wrong. We feel everything. We just learn to feel through it. It's called control, Commander. You call it discipline. We call it willpower. He paused, and the air between them grew taut, humming with silent challenge. Submission is a choice, not an instinct, Garett reiterated, using the phrase he had deployed in the arena. And I choose to fight, even when you have already declared me defeated. Erlynae let out a soft, low sound, a breathy sigh that was almost a growl. His honesty was the most unnerving weapon he possessed. It pierced the highly structured nature of K-Theran martial culture. You challenge the very foundation of our dominance, human, she accused, her voice hardening. Our entire civilization is built on the predictable nature of submission. Your defiance is a disease that must be excised. She reached out slowly, her arm stretching the taut material of her bodysuit, and placed her hand flat on the vitrium partition separating them. It was a deliberate act of proximity, crossing a boundary of professionalism. I am supposed to break you psychologically, she admitted, her voice now a low confession. I am supposed to make you realize the futility of resistance, but everything you do convinces me that your futility is our future. She leaned closer, her perfect features sharp with intensity. Tell me the truth, Garett. Why do you hold this position so firmly? What is the value of refusing to kneel? Garett looked not at her eyes, but at the strong line of her neck, the pulse visible just beneath the pink skin. He recognized the conflict in her. She was a warrior trapped in a system of technological complacency. The value, Garett explained, his voice softening but his words hitting like stones, is in the absolute knowledge of what you are capable of. If I kneel to a stick, I will kneel to a threat. If I stand against the stick, I know I can stand against the energy blast too. I stand because I refuse to surrender the one thing they cannot take, my internal assessment of my own strength. Erlynae's hand slid down the glass, her gaze locked on his. He wasn't posturing, he was delivering a fundamental truth of human existence. His strength wasn't a product of discipline, it was a product of unrelenting self-reliance. She stepped back abruptly, the intimacy of the exchange becoming too much, the air thick with unspoken, escalating desire. I have seen enough for tonight, she announced, her voice clipped. You are a paradox, Garett, a brute who speaks philosophy. I will devise a new test, something that forces you to rely on the system rather than your feral, dangerous human strength. She moved to the door. But know this, she added, turning one last time, her amber eyes burning. The more you stand, the more interesting you become to me, and a K-Theran predator does not let interesting prey go. She was gone, leaving him alone in the sterile cell. Garett didn't relax, he merely closed his eyes, his breathing slowing. He knew her interest was dangerous, he also knew that it was his only chance. Days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light cycles in the warship's hull and the increasingly intense, personalized visits from Commander Erlynae. The guards rarely interacted with him now, they simply escorted him and stood their silent, rigid posts. Their earlier confusion had morphed into a watchful, professional deference, not of respect, but of acknowledgement that he was her problem, and an interesting one at that. Erlynae's next act of defiance, or perhaps curiosity, was to transfer Garett to a private dining space adjacent to the command mess hall. It was a rare, almost unheard of honor for a prisoner, a step reserved only for dignitaries or captives whose strategic value outweighed the perceived risk. It smelled faintly of processed protein and spiced alien liquids. He sat at a small, polished table while Erlynae supervised his consumption of a nutrient paste designed for human physiology. She didn't sit, instead leaning against the door frame, watching him with that same unnerving intensity. Your intake is suboptimal, she observed, her tail flicking a soft rhythm against the metal frame. You are conserving energy, preparing for the next exertion. You treat this ship not as a prison, but as a hostile environment. It is hostile, Commander, Garett pointed out, meeting her eyes over the spoonful of bland paste. And I am maintaining combat readiness. You do the same. Erlynae pushed off the wall and moved to the table, placing her hands flat on the polished surface, leaning close. The proximity was startling, and the scent of her species, sharp, musky, compelling, flooded his senses. We wouldn't need to, she confessed, her voice dropping, the purr now back but laced with a new kind of vulnerability. That is the fundamental, tragic flaw of the K-Theran hierarchy. We have relied on automation and advanced shielding for 3 centuries. We believe a problem solved by technology is a problem solved permanently. She looked away for a moment, an expression of genuine bitterness crossing her sharp features. Our advanced weapons are powerful, yes, but they have bred complacency. Our martial arts, the codes of physical prowess, the true skills of the predator, are regarded as myth, the relics of a primitive age. We train our guards to follow protocols, to rely on targeting computers, and to expect submission. We have forgotten how to fight an opponent who chooses to remain standing. Her words were a torrent, a stunning admission of internal weakness. She was revealing the core rot of her entire civilization to the enemy. This wasn't professional conversation, this was a personal confession. When you closed the distance, Garett, when you used Joss's own body as a shield and Vix's strike as a fulcrum, it was an action so unpredictable, so feral, it broke the operational matrix of the guard systems. They had no counter for low-tech ingenuity. She finally sat opposite him, and the act felt monumental. She was placing herself on his level, acknowledging him not as a prisoner but as a consultant. I am the last of my line trained in the Virel, she revealed, the name a whisper, a secret meant for only his ears. The old way, the way of true physical combat. It is considered an outdated, barbaric pursuit, practiced in secret to maintain my family's connection to the hierarchy's founding principles. She looked directly at him, her amber eyes burning with a sudden, intense challenge that was a cover for yearning. The hierarch ordered me to break you, but now, I see that you possess what we have lost. You are a living testament to the efficacy of the primitive, the ultimate product of high-stakes, low-tech adaptability. She reached across the table, her fingers closing around his wrist. Her skin was warm, smooth, and incredibly strong. I need to understand what it takes to break the unbroken, she whispered, her thumb stroking the heavy vein on the inside of his wrist. Not to destroy you, but to understand your strength, to learn from it. My superiors want you to kneel to technology. I want you to kneel to me in an exchange of power, not an act of surrender. Garett felt the electric current of her touch, the genuine admiration in her gaze. The power dynamic had shifted completely. He wasn't the captive being tested, he was the key being studied. He didn't pull away, he simply let her hold him, letting her feel the slow, steady thump of his human heart under her grasp. What exactly do you propose, Commander? Garett asked, his voice low, matching the intimate nature of the confession. A genuine smile, sharp and breathtaking, finally touched Erlynae's lips, revealing the tips of her slightly elongated canines, the smile of a true predator who has cornered its desired prey. I propose we train human clandestinely. You will teach me how the apex predator fights without tools. I will teach you the ancient grace of the Virel, and we will both discover which power, human strength or K-Theran history, is ultimately more irresistible. The sudden, stunning realization hit him. The danger was no longer the fight but the alliance. Erlynae saw him not as a foe to be defeated, but as the perfect, powerful partner needed to reforge her own identity. The connection was sudden, intellectual, and intensely physically charged. The refusal to kneel had created a space for absolute, mutual admiration. The training annex was dark save for the emergency low-light strips along the floor, casting a dull red glow that highlighted the stark geometry of the room. Erlynae had disabled all internal recording systems and dismissed the guard rotation, risking everything on the secrecy of the next hour. She wore the dark gray bodysuit again, which left her movements unencumbered and her form devastatingly apparent. Garett, shirtless, his muscles corded and glistening in the dim light, stood opposite her. The air was thick with anticipation, a blend of stale air, exertion, and the high-stakes risk of their collaboration. The first principle of the Virel, Erlynae instructed, circling him slowly, her movements fluid and mesmerizing, is the control of the core. Every motion flows from the central point of gravity. We do not waste energy on unnecessary compensation. She demonstrated a stance low and wide, her tail providing a subtle counterbalance. It was beautiful, a dance of efficiency. Now you, she commanded. Garett lowered himself, attempting to mimic the unnatural, wide stance. His human hip structure made the flexibility difficult, and he struggled. Erlynae moved closer, her hands finding his hips. Her touch was firm and corrective. No human, she murmured, her voice close to his ear, sending a tremor of awareness through him. You are too tight, you must flow, not resist, let your weight drop. Imagine the gravity is 3 times stronger. She pressed down gently on his shoulders, forcing his torso lower, her own body positioned behind him, creating an immediate, impossible intimacy. He could feel the warmth radiating from her, the light graze of her long black hair against his shoulder. Like this, she breathed, feel the tensile strength in your hamstrings, do not break the line. The lesson became physical exploration. Garett turned, facing her, and demonstrated a human grappling technique, the attempt to secure a powerful, immovable lock on an opponent's arm. Erlynae moved quickly, relying on speed and torque. She slipped under his arm, her body pressed hard against his chest as she executed the move, trapping his arm against her side. The pressure was intense, forcing him to lean into her. Your technique is too slow, too reliant on strength, she accused, though her voice was uneven. Your species commits to the center line too quickly. But the power is absolute if the lock is achieved, Garett countered, straining against her, the difference in leverage frustrating him. He was losing the technical battle but winning the sensual one. Their proximity was overwhelming. He shifted his weight, using the unexpected momentum of his unfolding from the low virile stance. He drove his hip into hers, a move of primal, explosive human strength designed to break her concentration and her lock. Erlynae gasped, the sudden, powerful pressure against her lower body forcing her to momentarily release the grip. She stumbled back a step, her amber eyes wide, her chest heaving. That was brutal, she whispered, placing a hand on the spot where he had driven into her, and wholly effective. A human blow is not delivered with finesse, it is delivered with commitment. She stepped forward, returning the challenge, but this time, the lesson was secondary to the rising pulse of their shared physical arousal. She initiated the next move, a close-quarters block designed to deflect a throat strike. Garett brought his hand up, simulating the powerful strike. Erlynae moved with lightning speed, deflecting his arm outward, but she didn't fully commit. Her block stopped inches from his throat, leaving her exposed, her face tilted up to his. See, she managed, her voice husky, the block is complete, the threat is neutralized. No, Garett whispered, his eyes locked on hers, the threat is not neutralized. He didn't need to speak the rest of the sentence. He dipped his head, closing the final inch between them. The kiss was not soft or tentative, it was the collision of 2 apex predators, a moment of mutual aggressive dominance, the culmination of days of charged, suppressed tension. Her lips were surprisingly soft, a sharp contrast to the cold, structured professionalism of her persona. She met his force with a deep, answering intensity, her hands flying up to grip the hard muscles of his shoulders. The training room, the ship, the hierarchy, everything disappeared. There was only the sound of heavy breathing, the slick friction of skin on skin, and the powerful, driving need to dominate and be dominated simultaneously. Erlynae pulled back slightly, her breath ragged, her pink skin flushed a deep crimson that was intensely distracting. We are compromised, she murmured, her voice raw. This is treason. It is power, Commander, Garett corrected, his hands sweeping down her back, finding the curve of her waist, anchoring her against him. The kind that cannot be contained by your logic or your protocols, the kind that you invited when you refused to execute me. She surged back against him, her tail whipping rapidly, a visible sign of her inner conflict and surrender to the moment. Show me the full commitment, human, Erlynae demanded, her eyes glittering with primal hunger. Show me the brutality of your passion, the virile demands no less. The martial lesson was over. The physical lesson was just beginning, sealed by the powerful, intoxicating mutual respect that only 2 deadly creatures could share. He had refused to kneel to her authority, but in this intimate, secret place they were both kneeling to the power of their desire. The confines of Erlynae's private quarters were luxurious by ship standards, but still minimalist, all polished black glass and soft, pulsing lights designed to emulate the Catheran homeworld's deep sky aesthetic. Yet the opulence did nothing to soften the dangerous tension, now woven irrevocably between the commander and her prisoner. It was here, after the charged silence that followed their forbidden training, that the full, reckless nature of their alliance was realized. They stood near the center platform of her sleeping area, the material of her uniform slightly disheveled, the sheen of sweat on Garett's skin catching the dim light. The intense physical effort of their secret spar had perfectly primed the subsequent release of passion. The Hierarch Viz-ka is not a patient creature, Garett, Erlynae confessed, her voice thick with residual arousal and serious concern. She ran a slender, trembling hand over the rigid line of his jaw. My reports are being analyzed. My continued failure to break you will be interpreted as either incompetence or, worse, sympathy. Garett reached out, his powerful hands closing around her waist, pulling her flush against his solid frame. The cold, smooth plating of her belt and hip armor pressed against his skin. You don't have sympathy, Commander, he stated, his voice low and confident. You have calculation. You recognize strength where your peers only see a problem. That's why you're here and they are not. You are right, she admitted, leaning her head against his chest, her pointed ears resting against the powerful pulse of his human heart. But my calculation risks my career, my life. He stroked the back of her head, feeling the silk of her black hair. Then the risk must be worth the reward. Tell me what you need to convince your superiors that I am being broken without actually bending me. Erlynae pulled back, a new, cunning light in her amber eyes. I need a narrative. I need a visible struggle that ends with the illusion of my dominance. The K-Theran believe in the triumph of the systemic. If I show them that my superior K-Theran discipline is slowly wearing down your feral human will, they will accept the delay. Her hands traced the hard lines of his arms, following the definition of his biceps, the motion suggestive, possessive. But what I truly desire, she murmured, her voice dropping to a hungry whisper, is to dismantle that discipline piece by piece until only the man remains. I want to know the weight of the human heart, the texture of your unwavering loyalty. Show me that power, Garett. Show me the devotion that demands such an extreme, unbreakable will. Garett understood. The act of intimate bonding was the ultimate compliance test. She was demanding his inner, emotional surrender, something far more potent than kneeling to a guard. He lowered her onto the soft surface of the platform, his gaze never leaving hers. You asked for brutality, Commander, he responded, his voice roughening with need. Human desire is not a disciplined exchange. It is an overwhelming, consuming force. It takes what it wants, but it does so with a depth of loyalty your species has forgotten. The ensuing intimacy was fierce, driven by the shared secrecy and the dangerous power exchange. Erlynae's disciplined reserve shattered under the raw, untamed intensity of his human devotion. She struggled not in resistance, but in a desperate, intoxicating attempt to maintain her command, her strength meeting his own powerful, controlling passion. The sight of her usual composure dissolving, replaced by primal, purring responses, was the ultimate validation of the human apex predator's gift, the ability to utilize both physical strength and profound emotional commitment as weapons of influence. He wasn't just taking her, he was binding her with a fierce, possessive tenderness that she had never known existed. Later, lying together, the pulse of the ship beneath them, Erlynae traced the deep, hard ridges of his ribs. You are illogical, she repeated, but this time the word was a term of endearment. You risk everything for the illusion of control, but you offer absolute, transparent truth in your affection. I offer you partnership, Garett corrected, pulling her close, his chin resting on the top of her head. The human concept of devotion is not a system of obedience, it is a shared strength. Now, tell me how we convince your hierarch that I am nearly broken. Because I am about to make a powerful enemy. Erlynae sat up, her eyes bright with sudden, calculated determination. The commander had returned, but she was now fundamentally altered. The hierarch believes in the grand arena, she stated, her voice sharp with purpose. He wants a spectacle, a public demonstration of the K-Theran system crushing your human spirit. I will give him his spectacle, but you, my human partner, will survive it. The command deck was a massive, panoramic space, bathed in the icy blue light of the stars visible through the forward shield. Hierarch Viz-ka, a creature far older and more physically imposing than Erlynae, sat on a throne-like command chair in the center. Viz-ka's armor was heavy and ornately detailed, signifying absolute rank. His tail was coiled tight beneath the chair, a sign of suppressed displeasure. Erlynae stood before him, impeccable in her polished combat armor, her face a mask of cold professionalism. Commander Erlynae, Viz-ka's voice was a low, guttural rasp heavy with authority. Your progress report on the captive, Garett, is insufficient. 10 cycles and the human remains unyielding. Your reports indicate minor compliance, yet his vital signs suggest he is merely resting between exercises. Hierarch, the human mind is complex, Erlynae replied, her voice steady and respectful yet measured. He is trained for deep resistance. I have employed Sub Protocol 9, focusing on sensory deprivation and tactical exhaustion. We are currently stripping away the human's inherent need for self-determination, forcing him to rely on K-Theran procedure. Viz-ka shifted, the slight sound echoing in the vast space. You speak of stripping away, yet the metrics suggest he is simply adapting to your methods. This is unacceptable. The hierarchy cannot permit a species whose innate behavior defies our understanding of sapience to exist as a captive for prolonged periods. It creates doubt. Erlynae knew she was skating on the edge of treason. Her previous night's activities had sealed her fate. She could not let Garett die. I understand the urgency, Viz-ka, she pressed, adopting the tone of a ruthlessly effective commander. Therefore, I propose the final, decisive measure, a public spectacle in the grand arena. We will present the human to the fleet, armed only with primitive K-Theran weaponry, against a fully operational elite squad. She paused, allowing the gravity of the proposal to settle. If he fails to secure victory, he will be subdued and immediately neutralized. If he survives the squad, he will be deemed a unique, uncontrollable threat and sterilized for bioanalysis. In either case, the spectacle restores faith in the hierarchy's ultimate dominance over the rebellious will. Viz-ka's amber eyes narrowed, studying her. The K-Theran thirst for martial spectacle was ancient and deep, rooted in their old code. Erlynae was appealing directly to that core belief. A bold request, Commander, Viz-ka conceded, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. You wish to return to the old ways of demonstration. Very well, we shall indulge your archaic tastes. The human will face the Crimson Phalanx unnamed character group, my personal guard unit, 6 of my most disciplined soldiers. No energy weapons, training staves only, a test of raw physical merit. Erlynae suppressed a surge of panic. The Crimson Phalanx were legendary for their synchronized, utterly predictable but devastatingly effective formation fighting. They were trained to execute combat protocol with zero deviation. They were the ultimate expression of the K-Theran system. I accept the terms, Hierarch, Erlynae stated, maintaining her rigid stance. The demonstration will be in 6 hours. The ship's armated systems will be restricted to ensure the focus remains purely on physical prowess. I will personally oversee the arena's preparation. Viz-ka nodded, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Erlynae turned, her mind already racing through environmental manipulation protocols. She had convinced the Hierarch to use the one weapon that could defeat his men, their own discipline. She needed to teach Garett how to weaponize their predictability. She had 6 hours to prepare a human for an impossible victory. She made her way immediately to Auxiliary Holding 4, her steps quick and purposeful. She didn't bother with the door chime. She punched in the override code and swept inside. Garett stood waiting, having heard the tension in the hallway. It is set, she announced, her voice flat. 6 hours, the grand arena, you face the Crimson Phalanx, 6 guards, training staves. It is a death sentence, human, unless you utilize everything I have shown you. She stepped up to him, placing her hands on his chest, her eyes blazing with fierce urgency. You must survive this, Garett, she commanded, the purr of her desire replaced entirely by the snarl of her fear. Not for the hierarchy and not for me, but for the statement that an unyielding human will is a power greater than any starship. The training annex felt less like a practice space and more like a bunker. The atmosphere was charged with the knowledge that this was their last, desperate dance. Erlynae had brought him a weapon, a single, simple length of heavy K-Theran training stave, solid and dense, perfectly weighted for Garett's immense strength. The Crimson Phalanx, Erlynae explained, pacing with the restless energy of a caged predator, will operate as a single organism. Their strength is the diamond formation. They maintain absolute distance, delivering synchronized strikes to specific joints. You cannot break their line with force, Garett. You must break their programming. Garett held the stave, its weight familiar and comforting in his hands. He swung it once, testing the balance. They are trained to strike joints. They are not trained to strike through an attack. That's their weakness. They expect a defensive posture. Precisely, Erlynae agreed, her voice tight. You will use the VREL principles of low stance and core strength, but you will utilize the human method of offense as defense. When they strike, you move toward the strike, not away. You must be willing to sacrifice the extremity to gain the center. They launched into a furious session. Erlynae played the role of the phalanx, moving with rapid, controlled strikes. Garett practiced blocking, not by meeting force with force, but by deflecting the strike into a powerful counterattack that exploited the phalanx's required precision. Thwack, the stave impacted the heavy mat as he practiced a downward block that morphed into a brutal sweep of the legs. Faster, Erlynae commanded, her skin glistening with sweat, her hair damp around her face. You must be faster than their synchronization. Use the spin. turn your own body into a shield against the periphery. Garett spun, his massive human strength driving the stave in a blur, his breathing coming in ragged, painful gasps. His body screamed for rest, but the image of the 6 guards, the unforgiving Hierarch, and Erlynae's face drove him on. He demonstrated a key human defensive move, a low, controlled sprawl. If I drop, the diamond formation breaks. They are trained to maintain height superiority. It forces them to break rank or stop. A K-Theran never stops a sanctioned maneuver. Erlynae watched, her eyes burning with a pride she couldn't hide. It is illogical, she murmured, to intentionally place yourself in such an exposed position. It's survival, Garett insisted, rising quickly. When everything is logical, the illogical is the only winning move. As the final minutes ticked down, Erlynae produced a small, silver device, a palm-sized environmental modulator. I have altered the arena's atmospheric controls, she explained, her voice urgent. The Hierarch only restricted weapon systems. I have restricted environmental systems. At the exact moment the Phalanx initiates its 3rd pass, I will release a controlled burst of heavy, particulate-laden humidity. Dust, Garett concluded, a grim smile touching his lips. They fight with optical and motion sensors. They won't be able to see me move. It will only last 5 seconds, she warned. You must utilize that 5 seconds to break the line absolutely. You will not have another chance. She stepped forward, placing her hands on his chest, gripping the tank top fabric. The urgency was electric, the connection between them a frantic, desperate wave. This is it, Garett, she whispered, her face inches from his. You go out there and you fight for the life we could have. You fight with the true, terrifying will of a human being. Do not try to impress them, be the force they fear. He pulled her into a hard, deep kiss, the pressure a silent promise of his victory. The kiss was fueled by adrenaline, sweat, and the devastating realization that they might not survive the next hour. It was a final, desperate act of defiance and devotion. I will not kneel, Commander, Garett promised, his voice rough against her lips. And I will not surrender. I will walk out of that arena and you will walk with me. The grand arena was an intimidating sight, a massive obsidian disc surrounded by tier upon tier of viewing galleries, currently filled with thousands of K-Theran soldiers and officers. The air was thick with the expectant silence of a deeply martial society awaiting a spectacle. High above, seated in the command booth, was Hierarch Viz-ka, flanked by his most senior lieutenants. Garett stood on the center disc, his arms unshackled now, the heavy K-Theran training stave clutched loosely in his right hand. He wore the same sweat-stained gray tank top and dark pants. His eyes scanned the crowd, finally locating Erlynae in a viewing box near the front, her posture perfectly rigid, her expression unreadable. Viz-ka's voice boomed over the immense public address system, echoing throughout the stadium. Human prisoner Garett, before the hierarchy and the assembled Venithian fleet, I offer you one final chance to show deference to K-Theran authority. The voice dropped to a sinister, carrying command. Kneel, submit to the system that has judged you. Garett remained perfectly still, his feet shoulder-width apart, the stave held casually, resting on the floor. He lifted his gaze to the command booth, offering a quiet, simple but absolute negative. He refused to even raise his voice for the refusal. Viz-ka roared, a guttural sound of pure aristocratic rage. Insolence, Crimson Phalanx, engage, forced the submission. The 6 elite guards, the Crimson Phalanx, entered the arena with chilling, synchronized precision. They moved in perfect step, their staves held high, their formation the tight, devastating diamond. They were a machine of flesh and armor, designed to deliver overwhelming, coordinated force. They approached, moving faster than the regular guards, their movements utterly predictable. They sought to corner Garett against the perimeter. Garett waited, letting them commit. He allowed the lead guard to deliver the first strike, a powerful, overhead smash aimed at his collarbone. Instead of blocking conventionally, Garett dropped low into the virile stance Erlynae had taught him, letting the stave pass inches over his head. But the moment it passed, he surged upward and forward, a powerful, low human thrust of his hip driving into the center guard's stomach, forcing a painful grunt from the armored soldier. The formation momentarily stuttered. The guards were trained to maintain distance from each other, not from the enemy. Garett was already inside their fighting perimeter, a brutal human engine of pure disruption. He spun, utilizing the weight of the stave to deliver a wide, horizontal sweep that caught the trailing legs of the 2 rear guards. They stumbled, breaking the diamond's integrity. Viz-ka was screaming orders, but the Phalanx's training was a trap. They couldn't deviate from the synchronized, planned attack. They reformed, forcing him toward the center again, delivering a rapid series of low, crippling strikes aimed at his knees and ankles. Garett absorbed the blows with gritted teeth, relying on the speed and precision of his recovery. His tank top was now ripped at the shoulder, a thin line of blood snaking down his bicep. Just as the Phalanx committed to its third, devastating pass, Erlynae executed her defiant act. The air in the arena shimmered, a localized burst of heavy, particulate-laden humidity, the dust, erupted, momentarily clouding the visual scanners and sensors of the guards. 5 seconds. Garett exploited the momentary blindness with savage intensity. He was relying on pure spatial awareness while they were fighting a ghost. He pivoted, using the stave as a lever to vault himself over the 2 center guards. Landing behind the formation, he delivered a crushing, rapid sequence of blows to the vulnerable locking joints of the armor, exploiting the small physical space between the plates, the one thing the K-Theran relied on technology to protect. The sounds of impact were sickening. 2 of the guards collapsed instantly, their armor compromised, their systems failing. The haze cleared. Garett stood over the wreckage, breathing heavily, the stave held loosely, ready for the next wave. The remaining 4 guards were broken, their formation shattered. Viz-ka was roaring in furious disbelief. Discipline, re-engage, regain the formation, execute the elimination protocol. But the guards hesitated. They were trained to execute the elimination protocol against a defeated foe. The human was standing. The human had utilized an improvised defense. The human was demonstrating true, lethal prowess that transcended their system. Garett threw the training stave down. It clattered loudly on the obsidian floor, a clear signal that he was done fighting, a final act of ultimate dominance. He was the victor. The silence that followed the clang of the training stave hitting the floor was heavier, more profound than any noise. The thousands of K-Theran spectators were paralyzed, unable to reconcile the sight of the defeated, elite Crimson Phalanx with the standing, bloodied human. Hierarch Viz-ka rose from his throne, his voice shaking with absolute, uncontrolled fury. "Guards," Viz-ka shrieked, pointing directly at Garett. "Mobilize, execute the prisoner, neutralize the threat." A squad of 20 additional guards, armed with energy rifles, began to mobilize, descending from a hatchway near the command booth. The system was attempting to reassert itself through overwhelming force. But before they could complete their descent, Commander Erlynae moved. She stepped out of her viewing box and walked with deliberate, rhythmic steps down the narrow ramp, her armor gleaming in the high, brutal light. Her eyes were locked on Viz-ka, her face a mixture of defiance and profound reverence. She didn't look at Garett, she looked at the Hierarch. "Viz-ka," she announced, her voice projected through her suit speaker, ringing clearly throughout the arena. "The demonstration is complete. The human did not yield. He not only survived the system, he revealed its inherent vulnerability." Viz-ka slammed his fist onto the armrest. "Silence, Commander, you are superseded. Your failure to break him has compromised the hierarchy. Execution is the only path." Erlynae stopped 20 feet from Garett, turning her back to him, facing the Hierarch and the newly mobilized execution squad. The VRL states that true martial discipline recognizes and defers to superior, earned combat spirit, Erlynae stated, invoking the ancient, forgotten code that still held symbolic weight in K-Theran culture. The human Garett has demonstrated an apex predator's capability. He has earned the field. The 20 execution guards, moving into formation, paused. They were disciplined, but they were also bound by the faint, residual power of the old code, which prioritized martial truth above political necessity. Viz-ka screamed his final order, a desperate, high-pitched sound. "I order the immediate execution of the human and Commander Erlynae. Now, fire." The execution squad raised their energy rifles, the air crackling with the charge of deadly force. It was in that moment that the final, decisive action occurred. The 10 elite K-Theran guards who surrounded the Hierarch's command booth, Viz-ka's most loyal, most disciplined, and most heavily trained personal soldiers, moved. Slowly, deliberately. They did not raise their weapons against the human. They did not raise their weapons against Erlynae. Instead, every single guard, from the lead officer, Threk's unnamed character, to the flanking snipers, simultaneously dropped their defensive low stance. They lowered their rifles until the muzzles pointed at the floor, a universal sign of submission and peace in K-Theran military culture. And then, with chilling, perfect synchronization, they snapped to rigid, faultless attention. They stood not facing their hierarch but facing the human. The discipline that Viz-ka had demanded, the structure of the K-Theran system, had been usurped by the higher, ancient honor code. The soldiers were saluting the superior warrior. The refusal to kneel had earned the ultimate, highest mark of respect. Viz-ka's voice cut out, a strangled cry of defeat. The execution squad, seeing the hierarch's personal guard standing at attention, froze, their own discipline overridden by the chain of command and the visual demonstration of respect. Erlynae felt a triumphant, powerful surge of emotion. She was no longer facing execution. She was backed by the silent, powerful force of the martial code. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting Garett's. The blood on his arm, the rips in his shirt, the exhaustion etched on his face. It was the most beautiful, dominant sight she had ever witnessed. Garett, understanding the profound magnitude of the moment, walked slowly toward her, his posture straight, his eyes locking on hers. He ignored the gasping Viz-ka, the frozen execution squad, and the thousands of stunned onlookers. He stopped directly in front of Erlynae. He did not kneel, he did not ask for rescue. He simply reached out and took her armored hand in his, a powerful, possessive gesture that publicly claimed her, not as his owner, but as his equal, his partner in this glorious, world-defining defiance. Erlynae squeezed his hand, her amber eyes shining with tears that she refused to let fall. She had traded her status for this man, and he had rewarded her with the ultimate victory. The human prisoner had refused to kneel, and now, the guards of the K-Theran hierarchy stood at attention. The political fight had just begun, but the ultimate victory, the validation of the unbreakable human spirit, was theirs.